Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Kevin Wilson is the author of Now Is Not the Time to Panic, a novel. He is also the author of two collections, Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, which received an Alex Award from the American Library Association, and the Shirley Jackson Award, and Baby, You're Gonna Be Mine. Also, three novels, The Family Fang, Perfect Little World, and Nothing to See Here, which was a New York Times bestseller and a Read with Jenna book club selection. His fiction has appeared in Plowshares, Southern Review, One Story, A Public Space, and elsewhere, and has appeared in Best American Short Stories 2020 and 2021, as well as the Penn O. Henry Prize Stories 2012. He has received fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, and the KHN Center for the Arts. He lives in Sewanee, Tennessee, with his wife, the poet Lee Ann Couch, and his sons Griff and Patch, where he is an associate professor in the English department at Sewanee, the University of the South. By the way, in the New York Times Sunday edition of October 29th and 30th, there is a whole feature on him in the New York Times Book Review, so you might want to go back and check that out if you want to learn more. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Now Is Not the Time to Panic.
Thanks for having me.
This is like, I showed this book to my husband. He started laughing because I'm like always panicking about something. And he's like, could we put that like on a sign for you somewhere? Like this should be, all over the place. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah. No, I want to get it tattooed on my arm just to remind myself.
Yeah. Well, this book is amazing. It's really, I'm sure you'll hear this and have heard this already like many, many times, but it's so good. And I'm such a fan. The characters are so real. The whole thing, the backstory, the family, the whole, those funny triplets, the whole thing is so good. And I don't know, I've just been recommending it right and left. So I'm a huge fan.
Oh, thank you.
So why don't you tell listeners what it's about? And then you include this in the book of, how this whole phrase came to be. I was going to try to chant it for you, but I can't. So, and tell that whole amazing story. Please.
Sure. So the book itself is about this woman. She's in her late 30s, Frankie Budge, and she's got a kid, she's got a husband, she's got a great life, and then this reporter calls her out of the blue and wants to talk about this event in her hometown that happened when she was 16 in the summer of 1996, this strange mass kind of pandemonium. And the reporter has figured out that Frankie is at least one of the people responsible. So, she's got this really nicely set up life, and it's about to kind of get complicated, and it forces her to go back in time to think about that one summer when she met this new boy in town, Zeke, and they made this weird piece of art. And I'm 44 and I have kids, and you get to a certain point in your life where you've got yourself where you want to be, and then you start looking back, right? Like you want to trace the line of how did I get from that person to this person? And that's what kind of Frankie has to reckon with in this book, and maybe even track down some people she's lost touch with. But the book itself, there's a line that Frankie writes that's repeated throughout that kind of creates the pandemonium. And it goes, "The edge is a shanty town filled with gold seekers. We are fugitives, and the law is skinny with hunger for us." And it's a strange line, but it comes from my own life. I had a friend in college. We met, we spent a summer living together in an apartment. He was an actor. He was leaving after the summer to go to LA, Eric, and he gave me that line. He just wrote it down kind of out of nowhere. And being an impressionable 19-year-old, it just burned into my brain, and I've never gotten rid of it, and I've always tried to figure out what do you do with this thing someone gives you? Like, it's personal, it's meaningful, but how does it go out into the world? And so I wrote this book. I wrote it in a lot of ways just to use that line.
And you mentioned in the letter that Eric passed away, and I'm so sorry about that, and that you struggled with what to do if you should continue and how to keep writing through all of the craziness of life, even when he wasn't there. So tell me, did that make you want to do it more? And tell me about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that summer was intense. Eric and I, and we lived with my cousin as well. And it was just the three of us. We made little short films. Eric was the first person that made me think like art was something that like you could do. It was actually something that a normal person could make, and that inspired me. And we'd stayed in touch. We would talk off and on, but he was in LA and I was in Tennessee. And we just kind of lost touch, and I knew I was going to write this book. And in my head, I was like, I'll write this book and it will bring Eric back into my orbit. We'll be friends again. I'll return us to that summer. And I was halfway through the book, and I found out Eric had suddenly died. I heard from my cousin, and I thought, well, I can't write the book. What's the point? Because it's not going to bring him back. And my wife and my agent, who I think are the two people who know me the best, they said, it's fiction. You're writing a novel, and it's not you and Eric. It's Frankie and Zeke. And I don't know how I'd forgotten that, but it clicked into place. I was like, this is the story that I can write outside of myself so that it connects with other people. And in some ways I thought, okay, well, if it can't bring Eric back into my orbit, it can bring Eric to the larger world, right? Like, I can open this line up and give it to everybody in this story. And I found my way, I think, somehow to the end of the book because of that.
Wow. So what did your cousin think of the book?
he hasn't read it yet, and I know he's excited to. I think he's just waiting, and it actually comes out. I think it's like a day before Eric's birthday. So I know he's ready, and when it comes out, he'll sit down with it and read it. But yeah, I mean, you sometimes wonder about the limitations of art, like what can it do? But I do know that in the making of art, it can get you through those moments that maybe you couldn't have otherwise. So whatever happens with the book, no one can take away the generation of it, of how it got me through that moment.
I mean, I feel like there's a parallel with Frankie when she cuts her finger open, right? That's such that line all the way down, and how Zeke only has this time. They were doing like a blood thing for their, I'm not even explaining this one. The work of art they were producing, he wanted a little bit of blood, and so she uses an X-Acto knife, and next thing you know, it's like gushing, and she needs stitches, which she doesn't get, and it's like, but I think that is also part of the process, right? It can be that painful, and you can hemorrhage essentially, and then it just has to close up, and then you end up with your book.
Yeah, I mean that's excellent. Yeah, once you open the vein, you don't know what's going to happen after that. And then no matter what, if you open yourself up, there'll be a scar that reminds you, right? Good or bad, you have that reminder forever.
Yeah. Well, I love how you developed each character, not just Frankie and Zeke, but even the mom character. And, I mentioned the brothers, but just like all these different supporting roles, as if it's a movie, right? The supporting characters, and the night when the mom stays up all night long and is so worried that Frankie's about to start having sex. And she's like, oh my gosh, I can't sleep. I'm going to be up all night. It's just so funny. Where do you come out? Does it just come when you're writing? How do you craft all your characters so well?
Oh yeah, well, I really appreciate that. I've been happy to hear that people really like this mom, because a lot of my books in the past, parents are awful. I always write about terrible parents, and for this book, I just thought, you know what, I am gonna make a parent who is a good parent. And part of it is I'm always so focused on the main characters, and sometimes I try to remind myself there are other people that can help them through these moments. And so the mom was that for me. And so I tried to think, what would it be like to be a single mom raising these 3 feral triplets and this weird, quiet girl, and you want to help them, but how do you do that? And so sometimes, you help them by worrying in ways that you're just saying, I want to be, and I am going to talk to you, and I am going to be a part of your life, whether it's awkward or not. And so I kind of fell in love with this mom for her refusal to just step into the background. She said, I don't know what's going on with you. You are weird. We are different. But here, take these things and we'll figure out a way through it.
And how did you get your start writing anyway? Did you always know this is what you wanted to do?
No, God, no. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in this tiny town in Tennessee. I was so isolated. It was really rural, and books were just my window into the world. It made the world less scary, and each time I read a book, it would open up that circle just a little bit wider so I could imagine myself like beyond that place. I mean, strangely, I live in the same town where I grew, in the same county where I grew up, but I went away. I did stuff. I had experiences, but I just always loved reading. And then after a while, when you love something so much, you think, well, what could I do to be a part of that? Like, how could I make it? And I loved movies too, and I loved all these other forms of art. But when you grow up in the middle of nowhere with no money, it's not like I could get a camera. It's not like I could convince people. So I thought, what's the thing I can do by myself, alone? And it was write stories. And each time I wrote a story, I felt I was writing myself towards a future, so each story was fictional, but it was also helping me figure out like, this is how you're going to get where you want to go, so what books did for me, writing did for me as well.
So did you have other odd jobs along the way?
No, I've never I love that when writers are like, they picked
Bartenders,
apples,
you're like,
they were
I
a
know, right?
dishwasher, but I'm terrible at everything except writing. But I just always knew like I needed two things. I needed money and health insurance. And so I always worked
I
secretary.
wouldn't say becoming a writer is the sure path to either of those things.
I know. So I knew, I was like, how are you going to get this? And I just took secretarial jobs always. I worked in the gender studies program at Harvard. I was a secretary. I was a secretary for a writers conference. And I loved those jobs. I mean, sometimes they were awful, but for the most part, like the great thing about secretarial work is the people in charge don't really know how long it takes to do anything. Like they're sometimes it's awful because they're like, I need a 500-page report in 8 hours. But most of the time they're like, make these copies. And I would be like, oh, that's a 4-hour job. They would have no idea. And I would just go write or read. I get my work done always, but it was those kinds of jobs where you're just at a desk. People kind of forget that you're around. And I just always snuck my way into those jobs so that I could keep doing what I wanted to do.
So you're basically the world's worst employee.
Yeah, but no one ever knew. It was a great secret. As long as you can keep that secret, as long as no one else knows you're the worst employee, you're fine. You're golden.
So you think that if you're the worst employee, but your boss never finds out, then you're not a bad employee?
As long as you get the work done.
Okay.
Cares,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get
I
it.
remember once though, I was in the library reading, and someone that I worked with, like an administrator who was above me, saw me and said, "Working hard?" And I didn't really click. I said, "Oh no, hardly working." And then I realized I was like, she has power over me. I should probably not have been so flippant and be reading a book when I was supposed to be working. But I still, maybe it was just the Southern accent. I got away with a lot.
I could see that. So what was it like then to go from writing story after story and then becoming a New York Times bestselling author?
It's pure luck and magic, and that stuff's all great, but you can't, right? Like you don't finish a novel and you're like, a New York Times bestselling book, like you'd be insane. Like I'm yelling up to my wife that I've finished a great book. So like for me, it was always the pleasure of writing. And that's what matters to me, because the minute the book touches the open air, you can't control it. I mean, you can certainly, like, I'm with a great press. I have a great publicist, a great editor, and those people can position the book. And I feel really lucky. And a lot of the success is due to them, but it's still just luck, So I just feel like I got really lucky and it worked out. But even if it hadn't, I got the pleasure that I wanted out of writing it. And a lot of times for me, of course, obviously, I'd love to be successful. I want people to read my books, but really all I want is to do well enough that I can publish another book, that somebody wants the next thing that I make. And I feel like that's the sweet spot that I want to live in, to never worry that the next thing will disappear.
And what about health insurance?
I teach full time. So I figured an end around. But sometimes my wife is like, maybe we could figure out a way that we could write full time. And I was like, oh no, I'm too nervous. I need a lot of things in place that keep me settled so that I can focus on the making of things.
I like that. So tell me, what do you teach?
I teach creative writing at a small university on a mountain in Tennessee. It's called the University of the South. There's like 1,700 students. Tennessee Williams left his estate to the university, which is why I'm there. And I teach creative writing. I teach literature. And so, 3 or 4 times a week, I'm in this classroom with 15 students who are all like really lovely and wonderful and smart and engaged. And I don't know. I mean, I'm really grateful to be on this podcast, but like, it's hard sometimes to find people that care about books, like you want to talk about this amazing book you've read, and it's hard to find those people sometimes. And so teaching for me is like, oh, I get to be with these 15 people who are eager to read. We'll talk about books. And so, yeah, it's a gift. It feels, it is work. But in those great moments when you're just with these kids and you're talking about this incredible piece of art, it doesn't feel like work at all.
Well, if you ever need to talk about books with anybody, you just call me up.
I'm glad to know that. Duly noted.
I'm always talking about books all the time. Well, have you read anything personally great, or do you work on anything with your class that's like a hallmark book for you that is a great example of like what we should all aspire to or teach us some lesson?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I try to vary it, and I try to teach super new books a lot. I'll try to bring a book that's a couple of years old just to keep it fresh, but also because I want them to know here's what's out in the world right now. Mm-hmm. And so we just finished this book by Brian Washington, a story collection called Lot, and they all loved it. But the book that I almost always teach, no matter what the class, is Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Goon Squad, which I just love so much. And it's fun for them because it's nonlinear. It's a linked collection of stories. One of the stories is in the form of a PowerPoint. So there's all this kind of weird stuff that they're like, what's going on here? But at the heart of it, it's just kind of a beautiful book about the acceptance of the passage of time. Like, what happens to us? How do we get from point A to point B? How do we reinvent ourselves so we don't slip under the surface? How do we see those moments where it feels like everything is ending? And we say, no, it's not ending yet. There's still time for me to do the thing that I want to do. And these kids are so young. And sometimes I'm like, is this going to land? I'm 44. And so I'm always like, yes, the cruel passage of time. But even when you're 19 and 20 and you're on the precipice of the life that you're about to have, there's still that worry. Like, how fast are things moving? Will I get what I want? And this is a book, I think, that teaches you like time will never stop. But there are moments when you can slow it down, right? And get the thing that you need. So I just love teaching it. I probably taught it like 30 times.
Wow. How do you apply that to parenting?
Everything goes out the window with your own kids, right? Like, you have a plan in place. But there's moments with those texts too, like where I'm just trying to think about like the passage of time, and like you can hold on to it, but you have to let it move forward, right? And so my kids now are 14 and 10, and I can still remember so clearly when they were 3 years old. And there's something lovely about that weirdness where I'm like, sometimes my children are unrecognizable to me. I'm like, oh, you are not the kid that you were when you were 4. And sometimes it's really sad. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this is hard. But I think what starts to happen with kids is you hold on to all the different versions of them, that you can hold them all in your heart, even as they move eventually beyond you, right? To become their own person. And so for me, maybe it's the novelist in me, but I love being like, well, here's the story of you at this time, and here's the story of you at this time. And I can connect that line even as they get further and further away from me. So I guess maybe it's just I'm learning to hold on to the pieces that I can and let go of the things that I have to let go of.
That is really great advice.
It's not easy to do, though.
No, I know, but I'm going to aspire to that. That's true. I know, and the whole thing is made all the crazier by the fact that they don't even remember all the things that you remember about them. And so,
yeah, they're so, and my Griffin Patch, they're so tired of me being like, when you were 3, they were like, shut up about when I was 3. Like, I don't remember it. I have no memory of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have 15-year-old twins, and then I also have a 9 and a 7-year-old. And so I feel like I have had a do-over with the little guys. I'm like, all right, I see how this goes. Now I'm like, you want to sleep in my bed? come on in. Like,
I think, and also like what I love about, having a second and having more than one kid is that you think, this is what children are. I've had one. And then there's these kind of beautiful moments where like the second one or the third one, they're different in these kind of incredible ways that like allow you to do different things. The things that my oldest son didn't care about, all of a sudden I'm learning all these new things with my second kid. And it's just like, oh, okay, it's fresh, it's different. You think that you're just going to do the same things over and over, but they're so unique that you're just adapting each time.
yeah. The more kids I have, the more I realize I have like almost nothing to do with how they turn out.
Yeah,
I'm like, my goal is just not to mess them up too much. But
I was so full of myself as when I first had kids. I was like, oh, everything that's bad about me, they'll get everything that's good. And then I was like, oh, they're unrecognizable. They are.
Yeah. Where did you come from?
Yeah.
How did we end up here in the kitchen? So what are you working on now?
Oh, man. I'm trying to figure my way to a new book. And so it's weird, but just the way that I tend to write is I go back to old books and I'm like, oh, I have to keep writing. So I'm going to steal something that was very small. So there's a moment in this book where Frankie has written, she's a YA writer, but she's written this book for adults, that's about this woman who goes to pick up all of her half siblings who have the same name as her. Her father has just had multiple families and he's dying and she's picking them up. And in the book that I've written, I was like, it was a terrible book. Like, it was not a critical success. It didn't sell any copies. And for whatever reason, the way my brain works, I was like, oh, what a good idea. I'm going to do that. So this new book is about a woman who meets this guy who shows up at her farm and says, hey, I'm your half brother. We have the same dad. And what they find out is every 10 years, their father has left the family he's made and started a new one. And he has all these children that he leaves. And so they're mad and they want to track him down. And they're just driving cross country, picking up all of their half siblings for the first time, meeting them so that they can go have this reckoning with their dad.
I love that. I read a book. Now I'm blanking on what it was. There are these 4 half siblings and somebody does drive around and picks up 4 of them all over town. It takes place in, I want to say in London, or no, it's not. It's somewhere in Africa. I'm going to figure out the book.
Yeah, I got to get this so I can figure out if I'm copying.
It's not the same. You're not copying, but there are only like 5 of them, right? 5 siblings. But then right in the beginning, they go and pick them all up. Okay, my brain will catch up with me at some point, but I'll if I find it, I'll send it your way.
I'm going to add it to the to-read list.
Yeah, add it to the to-read list. I thought you were going to say you were going to write the bad, not critically acclaimed YA book.
Yeah, no, that's not in me just yet. I would love to be able to.
That would be hilarious.
Yeah.
You should commission that. It says like, yes. you could pair it almost like a gift set.
I like that.
It would be funny. Anyway, maybe not. Maybe to me. What do you do when you're not writing and teaching?
It's just me and the kids. We live on a mountain in Tennessee, so my wife and I and our kids, we're kind of a world unto ourselves. We have a pond in our backyard, a little treehouse, some woods. And so much of our life is just the 4 of us, always on top of each other. So the times that I'm not writing or not teaching, a lot of times what we're trying to do is just expand our circle a little. So we're constantly doing just little road trips, 3, 4, 5 hours away to explore these cities, So we're going to Louisville, we're going to Atlanta, we're going to Little Rock, and then in the summers, we just got back from London and Ireland. Like, when you live in a small place, everyone's like, oh, it's so tiny. What do you do? And I'm like, oh, we have great fun. We swim every day in the pond. We do this stuff. But then it gives you the excuse to say, like, it would be nice to see a museum. It would be nice to eat in a restaurant. And that forces us out into the larger world. So mostly what we do is travel and explore.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I have not been to a lot of this. I've been to Atlanta, but that's it.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, you spent the whole weekend in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we're like, yeah, twice, enough of it.
That's awesome. Okay, so what is your best piece of advice for your students, or that we can share with aspiring authors?
So, I mean, I think I don't think this is just writing. I think it's just life advice. But a lot of times what I tell my students is, and, I think also they've done well. They've excelled in high school. They're overachievers. And I just want to tell them that, like, I mean, the pleasure of art is making it, but you are going to fail. And you just have to accept that, that there is a period of time where the things that you make don't match up to how you had envisioned them, or people's response is not what you had hoped, or you don't have the success, or you get rejections. And a lot of times what I try to tell them is like, that's just a natural part of the process. And so what really matters is what you do in the aftermath of that, which is just refusing to quit, and that a lot of times the way that you succeed is that you just don't stop. That you send out a story and it gets rejected and you're like, well, nevertheless, that's it. And you quit. And it's the students, sometimes my students that I see making it are not the ones who were naturally like the best writer. They're the ones that were like, I love this enough that I don't care if it's not good. I like looking at it. I like thinking about it, and I'm going to keep doing it. And almost always those are the students that make it. And so that's what I was like too. I just said, I'm going to, like, obviously I have very few other skills. I'm just not going to quit. I'm going to outlast everyone else and make the best of it. And I won't mind because I get pleasure from making it. And a lot of times it is just who sticks around.
Did you ever see, I'm 46, so I'm hoping maybe this will not be the most ridiculous reference. There was a movie called Wildcats with Goldie Hawn.
Oh, yeah.
Well, anyway, she runs around the track so many times that she beats like every guy on the football team and like bats them all. I feel like that's what
this is where she's the coach of the football team, right? Yes.
She's the coach of the football team, and she has like no respect from the team, and so she challenges them to a run, and it's like pouring rain, and she's the only one still standing, and she's like, "See." Anyway, I feel like that's your approach. That's
right. Writing is a lifelong pursuit, right? It's a lifelong pursuit. So as long as you do it for as long as you possibly can, you'll get somewhere further than where you started.
I love it. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Oh, man, it was the best.
Sorry for starting it out with what you thought was Halloween music and really New York City traffic. But, thank you for your time. And I'll make sure never to hire you for anything.
Yes, please don't. Okay. But it was so lovely to talk.
You too. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.